you have to be fearless, right? just like the name of your podcast, you have to keep getting back on your feet. Every time you get punched, you have to get back on your feet and be fearless. That's actually very much driving me in life and entrepreneurship. You always have to think that you're building a legendary company that's going to exist there when you no longer work for it. Like, you want your grandkids and your great grandkids to look back and say, wow, holy shit, right? Like, amazing. I wonder what it was like at SquareX back in 2025. Deeply understanding the job to be done by your customer, I think, and really figuring out how to alleviate that pain, that makes a difference between whether your company is going to be worth 0 or 10 million or 100 million or a billion or 10 billion. It's all proportionate to how big is the pain and how well do you alleviate the pain for your customers.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be joining today by a true innovator in the cybersecurity space. Dr. Aleksandr Yampolskiy is the co-founder and CEO of SecurityScorecard, a leading security rating platform used by over 3,000 large companies in the world today. In 46 different countries, 9 out of the top 10 banks, all of the top 10 insurance companies. So you can just imagine how massive and how big SecurityScorecard is today in its impact. Aleksandr has had an amazing cybersecurity journey. Before founding SecurityScorecard, he has held key positions at Goldman Sachs, Oracle, and a bunch of other big companies. His pioneering work has earned him awards such as the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year. And not only that, Aleksandr is an active angel investor. So, founders who are seeing this, you should probably figure out how to approach him. A competitive chess player and a PhD in cryptography from Yale. And this is something we'll touch upon later. So with all his contributions to the field, Aleksandr has transformed the way organizations measure and communicate cyber risk. And it's a privilege to have him on the show. Aleksandr, thank you so much for making the time and joining us on our Be Fearless podcast today.
Vivek, it's great to see you.
Thank you. So, Aleksandr, to kind of kick things off, there is always an origin story of superheroes and super founders. So going back in time, I've read that article on LinkedIn, which you posted around getting interested in cybersecurity while playing Prince of Persia. And that's a very interesting place to begin. So could you just take us through that journey, how it all came together?
So I was a kid. I was 12 years old. My friend brought me a video game called Prince of Persia. I started playing it, but my friend infected it with a virus. And so I wanted to get back at him. I did not know what viruses are, but my curiosity drove me to learn about cybersecurity, hacking. And so I really developed a passion for figuring out how do you make certain type of technologies misbehave and how do you also protect them from ill-intended use. And then together with my family, we immigrated to US almost 30 years ago. I was only 14 years old at the time. My dad was from Ukraine. My mom was from Moscow. We split the time between the two countries, and we came to US with nothing. We were picking up chairs that people threw out on the streets of Brooklyn because we had nothing to sit on. But I pursued my passion in cybersecurity. I went to NYU and then did my doctorate at Yale in cryptography. I invented different type of encryption protocols. And after defending my PhD, I really wanted to build technologies and make them come to life. I did not want to just publish articles. So I ended up working for Oracle, Goldman Sachs. I was a team lead for authentications and entitlements team. Every time you authorize a stock trade, I built those systems for them. And then I got hired as a chief security officer at Guild Group, an e-commerce startup, which was funded by Venrock and a couple of other great investors. We had hyperscale growth, and the time that I had as a CISO at Guild Group, which led me to realize that there was no way to measure and quantify cyber risk, was actually the leading story, which led me to create SecurityScorecard together with Sam, who is my co-founder, back in 2014.
Wow, that's quite a journey, and it's always amazing to hear about an immigrant journey to America, starting absolutely from nothing. So, I mean, I can only imagine what that journey looks like, and how proud your parents would be today uh, of where you've come and what you've achieved.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah,
Well, you have to be fearless, right? Just like the name of your podcast, you know, you have to keep getting back on your feet every time you get punched. You have to get back on your feet and be fearless. That's actually very much driving me in life and entrepreneurship.
yeah, and just to kind of double click, cryptography PhD. That is something like most people would kind of shudder even to think about, right? Like massive mathematics. It's a non-trivial field. How did you choose that? I mean, what drove you? Is it that just for your love for encryption, security, or what is the driving factor?
To be perfectly honest, I was kind of young. I graduated college when I was 19 years old. I finished NYU, and
Yeah.
I did not want to go get a job yet. I really wanted to study and learn more about cybersecurity. I felt like I did not know enough. And
Mm.
I really loved visiting Yale. I thought people were really passionate about solving hard problems that never got solved. And
Yeah.
so I think that actually led me to, I really love solving these puzzles. And there
Yeah.
were a lot of really interesting problems, for example, at the time where homomorphic encryption, which basically means you encrypt two texts, and without decrypting them, how can you perform mathematical operations to combine the two ciphertexts together without decrypting them? So my advisor at the time gave me this problem and said, "Don't even bother. Nobody solved it for like 20 or 30 years." But I was fascinated. I would spend days and nights in the library looking at different type of arcane books,
Yeah.
and this feeling of joy when you figure out something that nobody before you solved,
Mm.
that really excited me. But I still wanted to build stuff. And in academia, you mostly did research and published papers. And so, but it was a great formative experience. I think it teaches you when
Mm.
you're pursuing your PhD, it
Mm.
teaches you how to find answers and how to think. You really learn how to look at adjacent disciplines, how to see what other people may have done in a different discipline and see if you can apply it for what you're trying to solve. It really teaches you a good method of critical thinking.
Mm.
It does not teach you, by the way, any leadership skills, any things. How do you recruit people? How do you hire people? How do you motivate people? So I was very book smart when I finished PhD, and people stupid. I did not know how to lead, how to manage, how to inspire. The non-IQ things, but EQ part of the equation, which actually determines, I think, 90% of the success.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, right? Like, which is this whole jumping from academics to being like an executive and then eventually a founder. Like, what was the big like cultural shocks and big transitions you had to make?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot of transitions. I think in academia, you don't need to worry about making money. So you can you can come up with a cool research project, but and it sounds very interesting and very fun. But I mean, listen, just look at how many new encryption algorithms get published.
Yeah,
You go take a look at academic articles, and
yeah.
every conference you have 200 new papers on different
Mm.
attacks on chosen ciphertext attacks on encryption algorithms and so on. But then nobody's thinking about, for example, attacks in a browser. That when you browse the website, somebody is just going to go and install malware on your computer.
Yeah.
So academia is completely detached from the real world in many circumstances.
Mm.
Then when I jumped into the industry, it was actually a really great learning experience because you realize that it's not just about building a great technology. How do you sell it? How do you market? How do you differentiate? Um, how do you do it at scale? For example, a lot of startups, they may have a really cool solution, but if you try to apply it within a
Mm.
huge company like Goldman Sachs, which has multiple geographic regions, tens of thousands of employees, it's not going to scale. It's going to fail. And in so
Mm.
many companies, it's not about more tools. It's about the process, the capabilities that you build.
Right.
And then finally, the journey of jumping into the founder. I think, as you well know, you don't realize what a lonely job it is to be a founder and a CEO. Every single day, you have death moments and exhilaration moments, and you have to keep reminding yourself it's not as bad as you think, and it's not as good as you think. And I think the type of a leader you need to be changes, because when you are, 10 people in a company, you're one type of a leader. When the company grows to 100 people, that's a different type of a leader. As you go scale to a multi-billion-dollar company, that's yet another set of skills. So you have to constantly reinvent yourself every single year.
Yeah, no, I think that's an amazing point. And Alexander, can we go back and kind of start to talk a little bit about like what was that market gap? When you were launching SecurityScorecard, and the whole product market fit journey, which I think for most startups is the most critical phase of even, should you even exist question, right? Can you just double click a little bit on that piece and how that happened?
So at Guild Group, we signed a contract with a software as a service to help mitigate e-commerce fraud. Okay. And we asked them, because we had credit card fraud and we wanted to install a fraud prevention software to mitigate the fraud. We asked them for a copy of a pen test report, and they gave it to us as well as a SOC 2 certificate. It looked fantastic. It looked good. It looked fantastic. Yeah. I met the team. I spoke to them. They sounded very smart, very credible. And just as we started integrating with their systems, we discovered unencrypted credit card data belonging to other customers. Okay. And I was like, oh, crap. I could lose my job as a CISO due to circumstances outside of my control, because all these companies are investing a lot of money to protect their own organization, but they don't realize that you could send your paperwork to a third-party auditor, lawyer, upload your documents to Dropbox, and then all of a sudden you get hacked and you're on a cover of New York Times. So at the time in 2014, I had an idea that maybe you can pick up signals non-intrusively from outside that tell you if a company has good or bad security hygiene. As an example, you could look at a website, and let's say on the bottom of a website, it says copyright 2005. 2025. Yeah. It's not a vulnerability. You can't exploit it, but it tells you that maybe that company is not diligent about protecting itself. Yeah. So we started building this prototype, and I started talking to different CISOs and asking them, how do you solve the problem of third-party risk? And it seemed like everybody was really fatigued from sending the questionnaires, and I was asking them, if I gave you this rating solution that you could use, how much would you pay for it? How big is your pain? Is your pain big enough to pay me $10,000 a year, for example? And I was starting to get somewhat of a lukewarm feedback. Okay. And that was an interesting lesson. If the idea is obvious to too many people, you're usually too late for the game, right? Other people have done it before you. So you have to kind of see something that other people have not seen. At the same time, if nobody loves your idea, then they're not going to pay you money. So you have to really deeply understand and ask questions when you do the product research about what are the problems, what are the pain points, and really deeply listen, basically. And product market fit is really difficult because a lot of the entrepreneurs get super excited by the ideas. They start building technology for sake of technology, but then it doesn't solve a real customer pain point. And so as a result, the technology never takes off.
Yeah. No, Alexander, you brought up a lot of great points. And I think, just to double click on a few of them, the first is at the very early stage, especially, to your point, if you're trying to create a new category, it can't be obvious, because if it's obvious, to your point, everybody's already doing it. And it also can't be at the other end of the spectrum where everyone hates it, that no one even wants to try it, because, then the idea is dead in the water. And that's where, could you talk a little bit? The scale of security scorecard at this point is massive. You've compounded year over year. You've created an entire new category, over the past decade. And that is non-trivial. That is probably the holy grail of any form of entrepreneurship, right? Being able to create and own a category. Could you talk a little bit about that, the scale and category creation?
Well, it really sucks to do it. That's kind of, when I started it, I thought it would be so exciting because, a lot of the time, you're like, wow, I'm not just going to create a product, but I'm going to create a category. The truth is, it's much easier to scale companies when it's a budgeted line item.
Makes
For
sense.
example, and you do it, and you have a budgeted line item, and you do something 10% better or 20% better. Like, for example, I'm looking at some KYC AML fraud prevention companies, and they have meteoric rise. And the reason they have a meteoric rise is because it's a budgeted line item. Like, you have to have KYC AML. Let's look at CrowdStrike. Obviously, incredible, terrific company. They executed very well, created the concept of EDR and XDR. But look, they were also taking the budget and money from Symantec and McAfee, who screwed up.
Correct.
And so the money was there, just Symantec and McAfee products weren't delivering. They weren't effective, and CrowdStrike came up with a much better product, much better delivery. It wasn't an entirely new category. So when we created the concept of security ratings, and we would go to CISOs and say, hey, completely from outside, I can measure and quantify risk of your company, your suppliers. And now that we give you these objective quantifiable ratings, you can use them to communicate to the board of directors. You can use them to communicate to suppliers. You can use them to make faster decisions. Instead of sending questionnaires to tens of thousands of vendors, you can triage and you can say, I need to talk to those 10% of the vendors. So I think the first couple of years, the first 3-4 years, people didn't believe in it. They would give all kinds of pushback. You're not going to capture enough interesting information from outside. It's inaccurate. You don't know what I'm doing on the inside. This is garbage. So you had to spend a lot of time educating the market. You had to do a lot of tutorials, explanations of how do you build it into your processes? How do you build playbooks? And then you had to focus on the early adopters. We had a lot of visionary customers who wanted to take a risk on a new technology because they wanted to do things in a better way. And so it took a while to get this snowball effect, to get those early adopters and then in the security community, I think the word of mouth is very, very important. People really listen to their peer CISOs. And then I think after a while, it became a must-have, basically. And so then it worked. It worked quite well.
Yeah. And so, Alexander, from your perspective, for founders who are trying to create categories and they feel genuinely that, this could be a new category, like what would be the playbook? One is, of course, the moment you speak with any CISO, the first question is, what is this replacing, right? Because to your point, a new line item in the budget is the hardest to squeeze through. But if something is going to be replaced, that's actually easier. As you mentioned, in the case of EDRs, they were replacing antiviruses. Could you double click a little bit on that? And, how do you even introduce, as you said, there's a lot of market knowledge, dissemination to be happening and everything. So category creation, the playbook in your mind, if there were like some core steps, how to convince somebody to give you a line item budget or how do you navigate that?
Well, look, you have to think about what's the job to be done by customer. So, for example, people had to go from point A to point B, and they used to ride horses, and then you had automobiles appear, and some very rich people were able to afford automobiles because they were very expensive.
Yes.
And then Henry Ford introduced the concept of Model T. And the genius of Henry Ford was not the fact that he created mass production or the fact that he paid higher wages to people who worked for him. He did all that. But the genius of Henry Ford was that he imagined the transformation of the entire society where there would be roads, there would be infrastructure, there would be pavements that didn't exist. So it was hard to imagine when he was building the Model T. But the point is, even though all of a sudden people started buying automobiles, the job to be done stayed the same, right? The job to be done is the same. So I think the advice in terms of creating a category, what is the job to be done, right? That's question number one, right? Question number two, what are some legacy technologies where people may have spent money on it, but maybe they're no longer needed. So you will have to have somewhere from where the money appears. You're going to have to find a way how to map your category to compliance regulations. I think compliance can always be a powerful driver to justify budget. If you say, hey, here's how I help with PCI DSS or GDPR or HIPAA or something like that. But then you got to take money from somewhere. So as an example, I mean, it's kind of the same thing that you're doing, because at SquareX, you introduced the concept of browser detection and response, that a lot of the attacks happen in the browser.
Right.
Nobody was thinking about browser detection and response 10 years ago, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But look, maybe some of the solutions that people use these days are no longer necessary. Like maybe the money is going to go from security awareness training.
Right.
Because how much money have we been spending on security awareness training for the past, I don't know how many years? We spend all this money on training, but then people still get phished. So why do we even, I'll give a controversial view. Why do we even need to have security awareness training? Correct. Why can't we take the money and instead put it into browser detection and response? New category, but now it's much more effective to protect you. So I think the job to be done of protecting a person from browsing the web and not clicking on stuff remain the same, but the category changed, and you're going to just take money from some inefficient legacy solutions that existed before.
Yeah. And you brought up a good point, and I totally agree with your, kind of controversial statement around security awareness. Is we pumped in so much money, and now technology is anyway so complex that it's not going to be possible for, any company to educate its users about threats at a bleeding edge. And those are the ones that you typically end up worrying about. So, Aleksandr, just to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the whole journey as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of folks, when they come in, cybersecurity, at this point, people talk about things like platformization, and if, point products can exist and all of that. So that, of course, affects startups in a very disproportionate way. Is it, should you build for the long haul, or should you build to be acquired and things like that? So any thoughts for founders, early stages, should we start to be paranoid that everything is going to be part of a platform? And how do you think about building a kind of legendary, lasting company like what you've done with SecurityScorecard?
Well, I think you should always build for the long term. I mean, I think if you are saying to yourself, I'm going to build a company and I'm going to sell it 2 years later, I think that's the wrong mindset. It's going to lead you to build bad technology. It's going to make you take unnecessary shortcuts. You always have to think that you're building a legendary company that's going to exist there when you no longer work for it. Like, you want your grandkids and your great grandkids to look back and say, wow, holy shit, right? Like, amazing. Like, I wonder what it was like at SquareX back in 2025. Look, and then I think if you really focus on solving the customer pain point and just building a good product for the customers and thinking long term, but think long term, but execute very quickly for the short term. You have a long outlook, but you execute for today. Then you're going to build a great company, and you're going to have, and the exit is going to take care of itself. Look, we're a relatively, successful company. So we're being approached all the time by startups who want to sell to us. So they knock on a door and say, hey, could you acquire us? And I can tell you, it's always a huge turnoff when you talk to a founder and you say, what do you want to do? What are you thinking? Right? Then it's always like a huge turnoff that basically, they're not trying to build a legendary company effectively.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Aleksandr, just to shift gears a little bit, I know, you're a prolific angel investor. You've advised so many startups in the early stage. So what what kind of companies, founders, is there like a little pattern in your mind on, who and why you invested? And B, given that you come in so early at a seed stage with many of these companies, you see some of them work out, some of them don't. So any interesting traits that you overall see, DNA within the company? So these are the two questions around angel investment and what you've been seeing.
Well, I mean, I do think a great founder usually has a chip on a shoulder. So like a great founder never gives up, never ever gives up. They can get upset, they can get disappointed, they can get frustrated, but they always keep trying new things. So you just feel that energy that the founder has a vision, and I always look for that. I do think that the founder needs to have. They need to be experts.
Yeah.
I always prefer a tech and product founder. Honestly, I don't believe into investing into kind of a sales marketing founders. Like, I just think that you need to be an expert in technology, and you can always hire a co-founder who knows sales. And then, look, I think investing is really, really hard. There's no magic playbook. I just think you got to bet on people.
Yeah.
Because look, you can start doing a lot of stuff like, hey, how big is the market, this, that. But in reality, a lot of the time, the markets don't exist.
Yeah.
They get created. Every seed or Series A investor is going to say, oh, your market is not big enough, or this or that, or there's competition, and it's not differentiated enough. Look, a great founder is going to figure it out. So I just bet on the team most of the time. That's 90% of the equation.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Yeah. I mean, and typically, how do you want founders to get in touch? Of course, some is via networks or people you already know, but have you ever responded to people who've cold messaged you on LinkedIn and all of that? Or do you prefer warm introductions? And this is just for founders watching, who'd want to kind of get in touch with you.
Look, I think a warm introduction always is best.
Yeah.
But you can also just email me, Alex, ALEX, at securityscorecard.com. That's just also an easy way to get back at me. I do respond to a lot of LinkedIn messages, although I get so many of them every single day that it's hard to keep track. Yeah, my main focus is just building SecurityScorecard, making it into a legendary company. It's always also really exciting to talk to other people and founders who are trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aleksandr, SecurityScorecard, I know recently you've announced a supply chain detection response. What is kind of the story behind that? And if you can give us some color.
Well, 100%. Look, I think today the big problem that we have is third-party risk management is fundamentally broken. You have companies continue to send pen and paper questionnaires to their suppliers. So it's just a manual check the box exercise. It doesn't drive better security. People use security ratings like the ones that SecurityScorecard provides, BitSight and other companies, and they just blindly send them over without context. I think the way that we need to disrupt the third-party risk management is by copying what CrowdStrike has done for XDR, detection response. But how do you do the same stuff for SCDR, supply chain detection response, where you can collaborate with your suppliers? You can collectively improve the security of the whole ecosystem. It's inevitable that one of your third parties is going to get hacked. But you want to catch it before the boom, before they get hacked, versus after the boom. And if you catch it before the boom and you see the signals telling you that maybe the suppliers are not resilient, maybe something is off, then you can engage the suppliers early on and collaborate with them to collectively improve the security hygiene. So look, we introduced SCDR, and then we introduced Max solution, which effectively is like managed services, if you think about it. And people love it. People really love it because instead of offering to them just a rating solution, we actually help run them the whole third-party risk ecosystem.
Amazing. And Aleksandr, just to double click a little bit on your leadership style, I mean, you're running a big organization. This has been growing, compounding in a very big way. So how do you kind of, I would say, characterize your leadership style? And if you can give us some color about, like, as the company grows, how to make sure you keep the culture, consistent and protected.
Well, look, my leadership style is I zoom in and I zoom out. If somebody delivers consistently, then they build trust.
Yeah.
And by delivering consistently, I mean also you do hire smart people to tell you what to do. You want to hire people who are proactively making things better and not just waiting for you to go ask them to do stuff. If a person keeps waiting for you to tell them what to do, we usually probably don't get along. It means that the person is not proactive. Look, I definitely believe in kind of a Frank Slootman, the former CEO of Snowflake approach of amp it up. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, it's going to take me 2 weeks, I'm like, why not tomorrow? So, some people like it and some people don't like it.
Yeah.
Because nobody likes confrontation, and nobody likes when somebody tells you it's not good enough or it's not strong enough. It's a very transparent culture at Security Scorecard. We don't believe in saying one thing behind the back and another thing to the face. I always tell to the people who join Security Scorecard that the job of a goalkeeper in soccer is not to catch the ball, it's not to prevent the opponent from scoring, but it's to win the game. And the job of a goalkeeper is the same as the job of every player in a team. So my job as a CEO is the same job as every other person in the company. So one team, one scorecard, no pointing fingers. And then look, obviously, I think as a company evolved, a lot of it is more about what type of a team you hire instead of how good you are. So my leadership style definitely evolved to conveying credibility through the questions I ask. Instead of just telling people what to do, like how do I get people to be creative for themselves and point them in the right direction?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And Aleksandr, just to shift gears a little bit, I wanted to brainstorm with you about, of course, what we are doing as well. And that's really where, my perspective was that, we are in browser security, browser detection response. The browser is interestingly one of the most used third-party applications, still consumer grade in the enterprise. And that's really where just wanted to get your thoughts on, how do you think about like browser security, the risks that bring in, and if at some point in time, if you would even look at considering having browser security as one of the important ratings of how an organizational security health is doing.
Yeah, so look, people are always the weakest link.
Yeah.
Almost every system in the world is operated by people, and the technology that employees in any corporate environment use the most these days is a browser.
Right.
So it just makes complete sense. And so many threats these days get through tricking somebody to visit a malicious website. Or, like, for example, we've done research, and at Security Scorecard Strike Team, which is our research team, and we see so many news events being hijacked. For example, you might notice tariffs. We see so many phishing infrastructure pop up around tariffs, where you get some type of breaking news, you click on it, and boom, it's a website which injects actually content from CNN and BBC and legitimate sources, and it looks very legitimate because they just copy the content, but in reality, they try to take over your computer. And so I know that, for example, you guys at SquareX have done really interesting research, and you introduced the concept of last mile reassembly attacks, which is fascinating, where actually the malicious components are being assembled directly in the victim's browser. So it looks perfectly clean, but then in the victim's browser, the attack payload is fully formed only when you reach the final stage, the last mile. So you're going to bypass all the traditional network-based detection mechanisms used by secure web gateways and cloud proxies. And so I think that at Security Scorecard, the way that we measure it, we always measured, for example, the proportion of out-of-date web browsers that an organization uses from outside. You're able to detect a lot of it from various sources like ad traffic and measure how diligently do companies uptake a new version of Chrome when it comes out. But look, I do think that this browser security and just attacks through a browser, it's going to be the next big epidemic that we're going to observe just because of how easy it became. And so solutions that deal with browser security, for example, solutions like more secure corporate browsers, like the one that, for example, Palo Alto has, like the Talent solution, which is fantastic, or the stuff that SquareX does for browser detection and response. Like, I think those are really going to become a must-have for any type of organization.
Yeah, absolutely, Alexander. And just to add some color to what you kind of mentioned, what's been happening, especially in the last few years, is browser vendors have also become very centralized. It's primarily just Google and maybe Microsoft doing a bit, and all other browsers, of course, are tapering down. Safari, unfortunately, even though Apple is behind it, isn't anywhere close to capability. And this is really where browsers have transitioned from just becoming website renderers to full-blown application platforms in their own right. And they now support so many complex protocols like WebSocket, gRPC, whatnot. And this is what has made incumbent security solutions unable to tackle the challenge, because the whole promise of SASE SSE in the cloud was send us all your network traffic, your browser traffic. We will look at it, clean and scrub it. But there's only so much you can reconstruct today from just looking at network traffic at the application layer. So yeah, absolutely. I think, you brought up a good point. And this is something we are seeing enterprise wide. Just to kind of also add some more flavor to this is there are new technologies like WebAssembly, etc., coming in, which just make things a lot more difficult. So anyway, we are super excited. One of the big reasons I even wanted to talk to you is we hope browser detection response, an EDR equivalent in the browser, can be a new category. So, I wanted to chat with you to learn from you, to see, how you thought about it. But yeah. One thing I want to kind of touch upon also is you've authored a book, The Perfect Scorecard, and a very apt name. Can you talk about a little bit around that? I'll tell you something we've been doing, inspired by something similar that you exactly what you are doing. But can you add some flavor to it? Like, why the book? How is it received? And anything else you can tell us?
No, the book was perceived extremely positively. Basically, as a former CISO myself, I always had questions about what's really the best strategy about becoming partner with a board of directors. How should a CISO communicate with a board of directors? And what I did is I ended up collaborating and interviewing dozens of CISOs and getting their advice, what worked for them, how they're doing it in practice, and compiling this advice into the Perfect Scorecard book. Just how do you report to the book? What's the best advice? And so here are a couple of kind of tips that came up. So first of all, communication is key. You want to establish a clear and honest dialogue with the board. The CISOs are from Mars and the board members are from Venus. Yeah. You need to speak language of KPIs and financial metrics. Instead of saying that, hey, I deployed Akamai Prolexic on 72.2.1.0/24 and it throttled a 8 gigabit DDoS attack. They don't know what it is. You're like, hey, I spent $100,000 on Akamai Prolexic and it could save us $5 million from an outage of a DDoS attack. So speak the same language, use clear KPIs, use objective trusted KPIs like, for example, SecurityScorecard provides, were used by thousands of companies to communicate to the board and benchmark themselves to peers. Keep an open dialogue. Present cybersecurity performance concisely and clearly. And then the final piece is just like a job of a lawyer, general counsel, the job of a CISO is to be a business enabler. You don't want to be viewed as a no team that throttles the business. You want to be viewed as a business enabler. How do you help drive the business forward, but do it in a way that mitigates risk? So those are some of the tips from the Perfect Scorecard book.
Yeah, no, amazing. Are you planning to give away some copies at RSA next week? Are you planning to do book signings by any chance? RSA, I know they hold that here.
I have no idea. We used to do it last year. I don't know what my I don't know the details that my marketing team has in store this time, which is, by the way, kind of like an advantage of being a bigger company. As you hire amazing people and surround yourself with them, they take care of so
Yeah.
many details for you. I know that we're going to be hosting a number of events. We have a fairly good presence at RSA. So I look forward to seeing a lot of friends and colleagues and reconnecting with them.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think the best feeling is when you're visiting your own booth because you scaled and everyone's speaking the same language that you aren't manning it anymore. So I'm still at the manning stage.
Well, I'm still gonna stop by the booth and man it, but a few times. But I look forward to stopping by your booth and saying hello as well.
Yeah, we would love it. We'd love it. So, Alexander, going to the kind of like end of the podcast, I just had like 3 questions for you. What's next for you and Security Scorecard in 2025 or beyond? I'm guessing the scale at which you're operating. I'm sure you want to maybe take it all the way to an IPO someday. But yeah, if you could tell our viewers.
Look, we're heads down on just building the best platform out there to help manage and communicate the risk. We're heads down on building the supply chain detection response category, which is going to transform how companies collaborate with the third parties to address risk. And we do plan to get the company to an IPO one day as well. But we're cash flow positive, so we control the future. We're not under any type of time pressure. We're just focused on delivering best value to our customers and really making sure that we provide this trusted, objective metrics that companies can use to collaborate with their suppliers.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, I know now you're probably going to run Security Scorecard for the next 10, 20, 30 years. But if you were once again a cybersecurity founder, day zero, what problem would you pick? Is there any interesting underserved area or some gap in the market you wish, some founder would pick up and solve? Barring browser security, I've already taken it.
Well, yeah, you're already doing a fantastic job on browser security. Look, I think security awareness is broken. I think security awareness is broken. People do this endless PowerPoint trainings, and they just don't work. So I think you can really apply agentic AI to help with security awareness and transform and help employees learn. So I'm very bullish on like using agentic AI, for example, for security awareness purposes.
Okay, got it. And just last question. I think a lot of cybersecurity founders watch this. If there was just one core advice that you would finally want to kind of close the podcast with for them in this day and age, when it comes to building a generational company, like what would it be?
Deeply listen to the pain point of your customer. There's a really good book. It's called Secret Lives of Customers, about a fictional coffee shop where the profits are plummeting. And they send a undercover detective to the coffee shop, and he starts interviewing the customers. Then he comes back and asks the CEO, "Why do you hire a cup of coffee?" And the answer is, you don't hire a cup of coffee just to quench the thirst. You might hire a cup of coffee, in other words, go sit in a cafe because you're a student and you need a place to do your homework. Or you might hire a cup of coffee because you attend an RSA conference and you need a place to meet a colleague. Or you might hire a cup of coffee because you want to treat yourself to a luxury before a workout. But depending on what you hire a cup of coffee for, you compete differently. For example, if you are hiring a cup of coffee to meet a colleague at RSA, now you're competing with co-working spaces or hotel lobbies. Yeah. And so deeply understanding the job to be done by your customer, I think, and really figuring out how to alleviate that pain, that makes a difference between whether your company is going to be worth 0 or 10 million or 100 million or a billion or 10 billion. It's all proportionate to how big is the pain and how well do you alleviate the pain for your customers.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexander. I think really appreciate you making the time for us and for the viewers. Wish Security Scorecard and you all the best. And I personally look forward to seeing if I could get an opportunity to bump into you or when you're in our booth, to say hi and speak more and pick your brain. But thank you so much for taking the time once again.
Hey, it was great to speak to you. Thank you, Vivek, and appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you.